Hi everyone, and welcome back to our discussions with Nielsen in Southeast Asia, talking about the impacts of COVID-19 and specifically on the FMCG and retail sector. I'm Vaughan. This is our sixth discussion that we've had, and today I'm excited to speak to Nicole Corbett, our Director of Global Intelligence. Welcome, Nicole.
Thanks very much, Vaughan.
So today we're going to talk about how to move forward. So we've spoken a lot in the last few weeks about China and the current situation that's going on there. We've talked about the way that consumers are changing their engagement behaviours. But what Nicole and her team have done is a fantastic job of talking about what it's going to look like over the next 6 to 18 months. So Nicole's done a great piece of work talking about rebounding, rebooting and reinventing and what that will mean specifically for consumers in the retail sector. Via that presentation, Nicole, and that work that you've done, we've seen these three tiers that we've established of rebound, reboot and reinvent. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure, Vaughan. So basically, I think the thing before we sort of dig into the detail is a realisation that most markets at the moment are starting to transition out of these restrictions, or some of the restrictions are starting to lift across our markets. But the world that consumers knew, most markets in February, is going to be a very different world, moving forward. And depending on the length of time that consumers or we found ourselves under this restricted living, the longer it goes on, the more likely consumers' behaviour, the way they shop, the products they buy is going to change, across those different time periods. So we've come up with the three horizons that you mentioned, the three different time horizons. So the first one is rebound, which we're saying where restrictions start to lift within a 3-month period post shutdown or post this restrictive living that we were in. And after that time, I think we'll start to see there'll be some changes that definitely will have happened, but there'll be some semblance of going back, I suppose. But still realising that the world we lived in is still very different. The next one really comes on to reboot. So that's less than 6 months, 6 months or less, I should say, that we've been under these restrictive conditions. And again, keeping in mind that length of time, consumers are going to start to have adapted to new ways of shopping, new ways of doing things than they had before. And then the last one is reinvent, which could be, up to 12 months under these restricted conditions. And again, by that time, 12 months of, being limited to what you can do to go out, supply chains have been stretched, fundamental consumer behaviours will really have changed in that time. And so how we've positioned this topic is to really look at, to say, well, across these different timeframes, different markets are going to, start to emerge. And what is that going to mean for our brands and retailers moving forward? Because the big thing, I think, is the longer these restrictions go on, we know the huge unemployment issues that are occurring across many of our markets, the longer these restrictions exist. And that's really going to fundamentally change the spending power of our consumers.
Okay, so when you dig a little deeper into this, and as the markets start to evolve down these three phases, clearly retailers are going to change some of their behaviours, but so too are shoppers. How do you see shopper behaviour starting to change?
Well, I think the very first thing is that the money that shoppers have got to spend is going to be very different. And within the new paper, or the topic that we've identified, is what we see as this real polarization of consumers. So we believe there's going to be two different segments of consumers emerge. There's going to be those that really haven't been, so they've continued their employment, and if anything, they haven't been able to go out to restaurants, they haven't been able to go on holidays. So if anything, they're going to have a bit more money in their pockets to be able to spend than they were before. So these are the consumers we're calling the insulated consumers. And for these consumers, they're probably looking to trade up to, some slightly more premium products. They're looking to, replace some of that out-of-home dining experience. So buying that, slightly more expensive bottle of wine, or getting extra takeaways or prepared meals, meal kits, things like that. They still want that convenience, working from home, juggling kids at home, all of those different things. They need life to be a bit easier for them. But on the other hand, you've got this totally different group of consumers who have been impacted by either complete job loss or stand downs or furloughs, where, you know, they've had to take salary reductions, for example. And, you know, obviously we've seen complete industries almost, you know, wiped out in this time. And that group of consumers, or what we're calling our constrained spenders, are going to have a very different set of priorities, I suppose, in store. And, you know, in terms of the products that are going to be appealing to them, they're going to be looking for savings, I suppose, in any way that they can. So, you know, I think it's really these two key groups moving forward that is going to differ, definitely across markets, but also within markets, you know, within regions, within a country as well.
As we sit here on the 20th of May doing this discussion, clearly governments are not going to be encouraging mobility of people either where shoppers are concerned. Do you see shoppers changing their behaviour, shopping less frequently, shopping more within their own local neighbourhoods? Is there anything like that you're starting to see?
Yeah, well, I think we saw that a lot, obviously, during the shutdown and during that restricted movement particularly. And I'm sitting in Australia today and, you know, we started to see some restrictions, you know, change in the last couple of, you know, the last 2 weekends where we can now, you know, travel. First it was you could only travel up to 50 kilometres. Now you can travel up to 150 kilometres, you know, on a weekend, but you still can't stay anywhere overnight, for example. But on a lesser scale, people have been locked into their neighbourhoods, you know, for quite a long time. And as a result of that, it really changed the nature of their shop, you know, from 2 points of view. One was proximity. They couldn't go very far, so they were going to smaller local neighbourhood stores. But then similarly, they didn't want to go to some of those bigger stores as well because of the people, you know, because of the, you know, they wanted to avoid crowds and things like that as well. So, look, and I think moving forward, and so the other thing, they've obviously been looking for other options of where they could get their products. So online has been a massive story, the huge growth that we've seen in online shopping. You know, across a number of our Asian markets in March, it was, you know, Singapore, Malaysia, I think was, you know, plus 30% growth of what we'd seen. And in, you know, specifically even across some of our European markets as well, that was, you know, up to 80% growth or more in any given week. So the biggest issue for online, and, you know, I don't think this is new news, but it was obviously the supply issues that retailers couldn't keep up with the demand. But as things start to calm down, you know, the pantry stockings obviously started to settle. Retailers are getting the, you know, the logistics behind online shopping, you know, more under control. I think we're still going to see, you know, people looking to that channel or that route to get their products to avoid that physical, you know, need to physically go out and interact with people as well.
And we've talked a lot at Nielsen about it's not one or the other, it's both, and more of an omni-channel approach. So for bricks and mortar retailers, it's as much about having an online and offline presence rather than one or the other, correct?
Yeah, I think exactly. So I think people are wanting to, you know, there's still always going to be a place for bricks and mortar stores, you know, be that the experience of being in there, be that the selection. And I think, you know, specifically with online, during that difficult supply time, I think, you know, consumers' assurances have been knocked, I suppose, is they either were having to wait 2 weeks before they could get delivery, you know, products that they wanted, you know, were out of stock or they couldn't supply. So they still ended up having to go to bricks and mortar stores to fulfill those needs that they need. So I think without a doubt, there is a definite need for both channels. And it really gives that flexibility, I suppose, to look for what consumers are after at a given point in time.
And we talk a lot about technology underpinning a lot of the actions that manufacturers and retailers should be taking. But even in the in-store experience, can you tell us a little bit around how technology can underpin some of the experiences for a shopper?
Yeah, so I think this is a really big opportunity, you know, and both for manufacturers and for retailers. And I think there's numerous examples that we've seen, you know, definitely across Asia and markets like China and South Korea, where some real innovation has really happened in this space. So, as I said, the fundamental is just online shopping. And, if you think of that as the first building block, we saw brand new consumers who've never tried online shopping, the older generations who came in and with retailer stores who were giving priority delivery and free delivery to those consumers, they were trying that for the first time. But I think moving forward, it's some of the, with the huge internet penetration and smartphone penetration across our Asian markets particularly, it's going to be that in-store navigation so people can actually see, which aisle they need to go to limit the amount of time they need to be in store. We've started to see examples where you can look to see, is my product in stock, on that shelf before I get to the store, so I'm not going to waste my time before I go there. That type of flexibility or that type of availability that will really, really help consumers make the choices that they need at the time. But then, I think the other huge thing, and again, we saw, and I think when you spoke to Justin on your last call, we saw some great examples of this coming out of China, is the whole virtual reality and live streaming and things like that, which is a totally new way that brands and retailers can be interacting with consumers. So, and I know there was an example that I saw for, I think, one of our manufacturers, the FNN in Malaysia, where they did a brand new product launch that was all over live streaming, for example. I think our beauty companies, specific beauty retailers have been doing this, like Sephora, for some time, where you can use a virtual or an augmented reality app on your phones to say, how is a new lipstick or a new foundation going to look? And I think moving forward, particularly, wherever these products are sold, be it in a supermarket or a specialty store, you're not going to be able to have testers and, in-store demos and samples like we have in the past because of the hygiene factors that are going to come into play. So technology's got a huge role, I think, in enabling, consumers to really try products, see what it's like before they buy.
Even things like catalog checkouts, right? Like, you're going to see this situation where consumers walking into stores are going to want less contact with anyone in the store. So potentially you could even see bigger supermarkets with bigger space being more attractive to consumers at quieter times.
Completely. And I think, without a doubt, we've seen the plastic shields come up around, cash registers around the world at the moment. But there's a definite funneling of people into the automatic checkouts today. But I think taking that the next step further will be when it's not still the scanning as you go out, you'll be able to walk out with your trolley. The Amazon Goes of the world, I think we'll really start to see more and more examples of that coming to fruition, where there'll be less and less, in-person contact. And I think the main thing is it's got to make it easier for the consumer to get in and out. So that convenience factor is still going to be a big play moving forward.
So let's move a little bit forward. The honeymoon of the rebound's done, and as we start to move more into the reboot and reinvent phases, we know that retailers, and specifically in Southeast Asia, where offline retail is still very strong. There's no doubt online will continue to be strong, but offline is very strong. We know that retailers are going to change some of their behaviours. Where do you see them taking ranges and the amount of SKUs they've got on the shelf, etc., over the next 3, 6, 12 months?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be really interesting, because I think, again, this immediate impact that happened, during, this quarantine living so much stage where, supply was, out of stocks were happening everywhere. Yeah. So without a doubt, retailers were trying to get the stock back on shelves as quickly as they could. They were having to limit the number of products that were available, and there would just be gaps in the shelf. But I think, that's all starting to, ease back, I think, a little bit now. Stock, starting to be replenished, but there's still big holes that we're seeing, across the board. But I think with that, whilst that was a huge challenge as we were, retailers were going through it, it also has allowed, almost a simplification to say, do we really need this many SKUs on shelf moving forward? They're working with a fewer number of manufacturers to, ensure that we've got that supply. And I think, fundamentally, what consumers are after as well is going to change. And if we go back to those two different types of consumer groups that we were talking about, those insulated consumers who have still got money in their pocket and still looking potentially to trade up to replace experiences, they're probably going to be wanting more premium brands and, a little, more innovative type products. But on the other hand, and I think this is the group that is going to grow over time, the longer these restrictions happen, the harder, the economic times are ahead, is that constrained group of consumers. They're definitely going to be looking for value. And so I think we'll see, and, in terms of a amount of allocation on shelf, a growing importance of the space given to value brands and to private label on shelf, because that's what consumers are going to be after. So I think in terms of that spectrum, the big key brands and the challengers, there's going to be a place on one end. I think there's going to be a place definitely for the value and the private label brands in the other, but it's that middle that's really going to feel the squeeze unless they can really offer some differentiation and, showcase why they should be on shelf.
And I read recently across one of the reports that we're doing here that the bottom 2% of sales come from over 50% of SKUs in most Southeast Asian markets. So optimization inevitable, right?
And I think that's a real opportunity for retailers and for manufacturers. And I think importantly for manufacturers to be on the front foot as well, because retailers are going to be looking to make some of these decisions. So if our manufacturers can be prepared to be looking at their own portfolios to say, okay, well, if we needed to cut back, which of the SKUs should we, take, say, okay, we're prepared to let these ones go, to make sure that their key performing SKUs or, the ones that they really want to invest in are the ones that maintain their place on shelf. So, but yeah, those figures that you talk about, they range amazingly. And, I think there was a couple of examples. Singapore, it was something like the 80% of SKUs for one particular category, 80% of SKUs accounted for only 2% of category sales. And like those type of numbers just showcase there's huge opportunity to rationalize within that. But the key thing is really trying to understand what that incremental sale is, I suppose, that a SKU can make. So to get rid of that duplication that's within there. And, again, that's a real opportunity for manufacturers to take it on the front foot as to what SKUs do I have that are different. And importantly, then they're going to meet the new needs of consumers moving forward in this new retail landscape that they're in.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, when I hear and speak to manufacturers and they're saying, we're going to wait a little while to see what happens over the next few weeks, this definitely isn't the time to wait. If you're waiting, potentially you're going to find yourself in that bottom 2% of sales. So it's time to be active and communicating a lot. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, completely. And I think you've got to be on the front foot. You've got to be prepared. You've got to have a point of view of what should you be doing with your assortment. But importantly, I think what also you should be doing with price and promotion as well. And I think this is promotion is another one of those really interesting, or the whole pricing strategy is another one of those really interesting things that both manufacturers and retailers need to be addressing. Because if you look across our markets, from a promotional standpoint and the reliance on promotional activity, we've had markets like Australia that I think up to 40% of, volume is sold on promotion for FMCG. So you've got, big dollars that are invested in this. But again, when COVID hit and, the whole lockdown was happening, the supply issues that were happening, promotions just suddenly stopped or were severely ramped down to try and manage those supply issues. But so after 6 weeks, I suppose, of having no promotional activity, there's a chance to really reset, I suppose, what the landscape should look like moving forward, because consumers have got used to not necessarily seeing things on promotion. So we can start to redefine what value means for consumers, and really start to say, okay, well, were we wasting, which I think we know from all the price and promo studies that we've done, the amount of wastage that is there in trade spend, to make sure we focus on the products that really deliver the incremental sales and cut back on those ones that consumers would have bought anyway. So, so again, I think there's some, different types of strategies that both manufacturers and retailers can be thinking about. So we know consumers are going to want value, but maybe it's, economy or bonus packs, for example, that are going to be more important moving forward. Maybe, we should be reconsidering EDLP strategies so that consumers know when they go in store, they'll get the same product at the same price rather than, the luck of the draw with promotional activity. So, because the other thing I think you mentioned up front, but without a doubt, the shopper behavior has changed in terms of people going on fewer trips, but when they shop, they've got those bigger baskets. So it's an opportunity for our retailers and manufacturers to say, well, how do we lock our consumers in, to try and get that loyalty as well? And again, economy packs and, multi-packs and things like that are a way to make your consumer stay longer with your brand as well, to take them out of the market that little bit longer.
Yeah, this is a rare moment in time in FMCG where we can pivot what we've done from price and promotion over the last 50 years. We've talked a lot at Nielsen about promotional junkies, certainly in my nearly 20 years here. It's a time to sit back and go, how do we take people off the price drug, and get them back into other solutions? I think overall the basket size and the cost of the basket is going to become incredibly important, particularly if we go into the reinvent phase when we know unemployment is already starting to grow, and it's going to start to really hit consumers where they're like, wow. And the biggest spend, or one of the biggest spends they're going to be hit with each month, is their food and beverage bill, right? Their grocery bills when they go along, right? So yeah, I definitely agree. So you would suggest EDLP, you would start to think about shallower price promotions, economy ranges, but even in the retail sector, you talked earlier about private label. In Southeast Asia, we haven't really ever had a big push for private label, but surely this is the chance, right, for retailers?
I think so. And, you look at Europe, you look at Australia and New Zealand, for example, where you've got private label accounting, for up to 30, in some instances, up to 40% of sales in FMCG. I think, and it's not just when we think of private label, it's not always, the lowest price tier, particularly in some of these markets. You obviously have got premium private label offering as well, the same in the US and Canada. But again, I think generally they're always pipped just that bit below, even if it's a private offering, the main brand market. So even if, these constrained consumers are looking for an indulgence or looking for a bit of a treat, having a private label offering there that importantly meets quality is still going to be key to be able to deliver on that. But yeah, it's a huge opportunity in Asia where majority of our markets, private label, is under 2% across majority of our Asian markets. So it's a natural, I think. And we have many value brands, I think in many of our markets, but I think it's that opportunity, especially for retailers, to start differentiating in this space.
No, I've taken up plenty of your time today, Nicole. I think some real big outcomes for me is the importance of understanding changing shopper behaviours as we go through these 3 levels, right? It's not going to be a natural, we're back to normal, because we know it's not going to be. The second thing for me is manufacturers need to do something and fast, right? We know that range rationalisation is coming. We know that that's inevitable. We know that our promotional schedules as well need to change. The way that we've been promoting more heavily by price historically, this is a chance for us to change. And all of that's being underpinned by technology, right? So huge opportunity. So I really thank you 100%. For taking your time today. Really do appreciate it. For anyone listening or watching today, if you've got any questions or comments, reach out to your Nielsen person that looks after your account, or come back to us and any of the email addresses that are attached to this link. And we look forward to talking to you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Vaughan.